The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, or whatever it might be. I hope it's good. And welcome to our fourth session of studying Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. Today we're going to look at two chapters which are very important, as they all are. The Six Realms and the Four Noble Truths. And I think both of these themes are familiar for most of you. The last time towards the end, we discussed something very important, which is Chögyam Trumpa's point about how we cannot begin the spiritual path without really knowing what it is that we're aiming to purify or aiming to remedy. The more we look at suffering and the display of suffering and the conditionality of suffering, the more we become aware of the complexity of suffering, in the sense that we understand the conditions. We also understand that the suffering that we experience and the realms of samsara are not monolithic truths. They don't exist as solid objective phenomena, but they are created through the experiencer and the ignorance that leads us to believe in our own projections. And this is the point we're driving home through clearly identifying the patterns, the dynamics, and the causes, the development of ego and the operation of ego, like we looked at last time. This we're going to be looking further at in the context of the six realms. And with the Four Noble Truths, we're going to look at how the condition of suffering, which is something that the Buddha very compassionately spoke about, because the Buddha was speaking to us. He wasn't showing off and talking about his own enlightenment. He was addressing us as a physician and looking at our condition. But he was also making a point about that is something that's curable, looking at the causes of it and what can be done. So we are, in fact, addressing the whole issue here with a lot of pragmatism and insight. And hence, these are really important points. So last time we looked at the six realms very briefly, and now we're going to be going into some more detail. And again, looking at our protagonist, monkey, and the monkey's experience. And of course, as the metaphor or image for the confused mind, this is all about us, and it's all about what's happening at any given time, really, in terms of our experience. We're not stuck. This is so important. We are continually living with the very provocative insight, and this is, of course, also what this is about, understanding how these realms, they are projections that we, at any given point, could step out of, how we could recognize the dreamlike quality of them. So monkey in hell. And as you read this description, you understand how the struggle of monkey intensifies the pain, solidifies the walls. In the hungry ghost realm then, which is then the other realm that we're going to talk about, monkey has continual desire that is never gratified. He's never satisfied. Trungpa just says the pain and hunger of the Preta Loka, which is the hungry ghost realm, as with the aggression of the hell realm, and the preoccupations of the other realms, provide monkey with something exciting to occupy himself, something solid to relate to, something to make him feel secure that he exists as a real person. He is afraid to give up his security and entertainment, afraid to venture out into the unknown world of open space. He would rather stay in his familiar prison, no matter how painful and oppressive it might be. So the scenario that we have in the hells, it's overwhelming with its madness and the oppressive sense of aggression in the perception of the environment. It's ever self-perpetuating. In the case of the hot hells, there is the inflamed reaction to what happens, even to the point of wishing that we were dead, that we wish we could suicide. In the cold hells, there's this seething, yet silent recognition that still effectively is about aggression, hatred. And this is then also reflected then in display of this icy or chilled environment. So we, of course, are probably familiar with similar scenarios as they're described in the context of Catholic, what would we call it, scripture. And also, we have these iconographic descriptions as the likes of Hieronymus Bosch. And so for the modern person, this is very difficult. It's very difficult for us to actually accept this. And that's where we need to recollect what it is that is the subject matter here. And it is the capacity of the mind to solidify projection. And understanding how paranoia and aggression, it is something that we live with, exist with, then we can begin to understand what is it really we're talking about here. We might think that this has something to do with a particular paradigm or thought or belief system, but it is really more about immediate empirical experience of what we contain and just understanding how it could play out in terms of our actual present experience. And for some people, even in this human life, they might have had this experience. So eventually then, with the hell experience, that might give way then to the hungry ghost realm. And this is a condition where there's a hope. With the hell realm, there's not really any hope. It's just complete overwhelm. But with the hungry ghost realm, even though there's hope, there's also the continual frustration of not getting what we're wanting. And there's this sense of poverty. So monkey is always missing what it is that he wants. He sees it, rushes towards it, and it is lost. He never gets satisfaction. So he lives with this sense of poverty. Trungpa says the pain of disappointment involves the monkey in a love-hate relationship with his dreams. He's fascinated by them, but the disappointment is so painful that he is repelled by them as well. So this is a realm which is about not having, but it's a realm that is consumed by the experience of hunger that wants. And that is then reflected in the perceptions of the outer realm. So as with the hell realm, it comes back to opting for the secure familiarity of the prison. Now, this we might think it's a very sort of nice, comfy, cushy, middle class sort of a philosophical way of addressing something that for some is so immediately painful and tragic, immensely painful. But this is us trying to understand the reluctance to let go of this self-centering that we experience in the present life. And so the issue here is that the ego does not exist. And so it develops these strategies to confirm its own solidity. And these are what the six realms in fact are, different styles of this self-imposed imprisonment. Talking of which, I hope you had the chance to then read the chapter that I put up in the reading material. So this frustration leads to resigning to a set patterns of responses. This is the animal realm. Eventually, monkey discovers discernment and the passion of choice, that we could somehow manipulate our reality, and that is then the human realm. Referring to the animal realm, Trungpa just says he is intoxicated with his safe, self-contained familiar world, and so he fixes his attention on familiar goals and pursues them with unswerving and stubborn determination. And describing the conditions for the human realm, he begins to become somewhat more intelligent, discriminating between pleasurable and painful experiences in an effort to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. This is the human realm, the realm of discriminating passion. So in the case of monkey abiding in the animal realm, this is the reaction to the experience of the other realm, and particularly then the lower realms, where there's an understanding that no matter what you want, you're not going to get it. And so Monkey just retires or resigns into some set patterns of responding to the world. And these are very unimaginative. They have this mechanical dimension, which is then a characteristic of the way that the animal realm functions. So symbolized then by the pig with its choiceless pursuit of whatever is right in front of its snout. The human realm, this emerges as Monkey discovers the possibility of interacting intelligently, discerningly with the world, and then making choices in conformity with his desires, which is then what he discovers is possible. Tsongsa Rinpoche, he once, and I think I mentioned this also last time, describes the three higher realms as being the place where there's some understanding that what we do has an impact, cause and effect, that what we do actually has a result, and so we can shape our experience. So even though Monkey can manipulate the phenomena according to the desires of Monkey, then there's still the four great rivers of suffering. There's birth, old age, illness, and death. As we'll also see with the Four Noble Truths and the truth of suffering, in fact, there is always pain also in the human realm, certainly in our experience. There's the pleasurable that we want to hold on to, the painful that we want to that we want to avoid. So the human realm is still within the realm of samsara. There's more intelligence, there's discerning, but there's also this fascination simply with the desired objects, and there's this passion that is basic to the human realm. So as a jealous god, Monkey is competitive, ever striving and ever fighting. In the god realm, Monkey abides in the form and formless god realms. In the form realm, he is continually gratified. In the formless realms, he dwells on increasingly subtle experiences of space and consciousness, ultimately attaining egohood, the most subtle kind of sustaining the sense of ego. In Tibetan, these highest realms are referred to as Sitse, which means the peak of samsara, and also Chiang Main, which means nothing whatsoever. So that's where ego just dwells on its natural just consciousness, but it's still, however we might describe it as pure consciousness, it's still with a reference. It's still that I am. So with the presence of pain, then Monkey conceives of the entire absence of pain. This, of course, is introduced in the human realm, that you could do something. And that's where the Monkey then manages to create the conditions for a painless condition, which is heaven. He strives to attain eternal security, which leaves then the eventually striving with that leads to the jealous god realm, the asuras. So as there is the idea of heaven and aspiring to that, being stuck in that ambition, then there's the striving of the jealous god realm, the asuras, and that's where Monkey becomes powerful. And yet his power is directed in a greater success, but also with a very keen awareness of those that are better. And he suffers then from this competitive frame of mind, which leads to aggression and warfare. And also, according to Trungpa Rinpoche, then in the Asura realm, there is this occasional fit of self-condemnation and the sense that I must work harder to achieve. So there is this perception of trouble and conflict in the environment. In the classical literature, you have this image of the, you find this, for example, in the Wheel of Samsara that you saw earlier. And also, if you look outside the murals of the Wheel of Existence outside temples, you can see the Asuras are growing a tree. And they tend to the tree, it grows in their realm, but the branches and the crown of the tree blossoms in the God realm, and so all the gods, they come floating on their clouds, and they pick all the fruits, which are actually the fruits of the endeavors of the asuras. So the asuras are then at war with the gods who are stealing their fruit. So this situation of being exploited and failing and so on haunts the asura mentality. In the God realm, then there is the sense of achievement, and monkey relaxes into self-absorption. Pride. He can have anything he wants merely by thinking of it. So this is the realm of form, the God realm of form, and it's the more gross of the two styles of God realm that you have. Eventually, monkey discovers a very spiritual and less concrete dimension, and then the monkey settles into formless jhana, or meditation, formless absorption, and he dwells in these increasingly subtle aspects of space and consciousness, and attains the very highest levels of samsara, and he takes great pride in this condition. So even though this might appear as non-duality, there is still this sense of dwelling. So it is a temporary state of having a sense of complete perfection and egohood. Trungpa just says, in regards to all the aspects of samsara, he says, this perpetual cycle of struggle, achievement, disillusionment, and pain is the circle of samsara, the karmic chain reaction of dualistic fixation. So right from this start in this work, we've looked at how we separate our projection from ourselves, and we struggle with that. That is the initial cause of the confusion in samsara. It starts with the blackout, and then there is this sense of self and other that we are solidifying. And this is the dualistic fixation. And that's why we last time discussed about how this plays out. And this is what lies at the heart of what needs to be addressed. So the human realm. In the human realm, monkey can possibly discover the wisdom that sees through the game of samsara. With such wisdom comes the softness of compassion that penetrates the solid walls of samsara. Trungpa says he begins to realize that the world was never outside of himself, that it was his own dualistic attitude, the separation of I and other, that created the problem. He begins to understand that he himself is making the walls solid, that he is imprisoning himself through his ambition. Remember that Trungpa actually also says that it's not as if he's gone away from the jungle and into a house with solid walls, but it's more that his perception is that his experience in the jungle, he's never gone anywhere else, but his rigidity and his solidification of this dualistic fixation, the separation of self and other, is such that he creates, even though he is in the jungle, he's creating these solid walls. So what we're speaking about here with the human realm is more that the human realm actually holds the possibility that we could break out from samsara altogether. The human intellect and the awareness is the key to breaking free. So monkey can begin to, as Trungpa says, question the obsession of relating to something, of getting something, to question the solidity of the world that he experiences. In the human realm, there's the possibility of developing a panoramic awareness that sees the irony of the samsaric situation. Here he can discover how the walls are soft and penetrable. And this comes from wisdom, and with wisdom, this naturally emerging non-aggression that is compassion, karuna. And with that soft and noble heart, he then relates to the world with less fear, and he begins to communicate with softness, openness, and warmth. So that's where we are looking at the beginning of the solution. Now, as I've said earlier, the in general, I don't go through the questions and answers, but this time I couldn't help myself. There was just such good questions, and I felt that and also actually the way that the chapter is structured, it seems like some of the questions and answers are in the middle of the chapter. Some of these are just, I'm paraphrasing them, abbreviating them, but and some of them are in their completeness. So these are some question and answers in their completeness. And by the way, just something again that I just want to draw your attention to. Up in the right-hand corner, I have the page numbers. So if you have the printed edition that I think more or less follows in the various editions, more or less the same page numbers, then you can always refer back to the book. So there's a question there. You stated earlier that we hallucinate the phenomenal world and want to break out of it. I understand the Buddhist teaching to say that the phenomenal world is simply the manifestation of emptiness. So what would there be to break out of? The answer, this is such an important point, and this of course holds the whole question where confusion around what we mean with emptiness actually plays in. Trungpa answers, the point is that in the perception of ego, the phenomenal world is very real, overwhelming, solid. It may in fact be hallucinatory, but as far as Monkey is concerned, the hallucination is quite real and solid. From his confused point of view, even thought becomes very solid and tangible. It is not good enough to say that these hallucinations do not exist because form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Try telling that to a neurotic monkey. As far as he, the monkey, is concerned, form exists as solid and heavy form. It is real to him because he is so obsessed with it that he does not allow any space to see otherwise. He is too busy continuously trying to reinforce his own existence. He never allows a gap. Thus there is no room for inspiration, no room to see other aspects, different angles of the situation. From the monkey's point of view, the confusion is real. When you have a nightmare, at that moment it is real, terribly frightening. On the other hand, when you look back at the experience, it seems merely to have been a dream. You cannot use two different kinds of logic simultaneously. You have to see the confused aspect completely in order to see through it, to see the absurdity of it. Like I said earlier, everything that we're doing in the Buddhist teaching is pointing to the conditional nature of this suffering. And one of the famous quotes that we often have that sums up the Buddhist teaching, particularly in terms of the view, is this, what we call the Yidama, and actually in the Mahayana, we put an Om at the beginning and a Soha at the end, and then we have it as a mantra, because it is so significant. It's actually what we call a proclamation that holds the power of truth, because it's something that we can verify empirically in our own experience, and that is causation. We're not talking about an external creator having done something mystical that we have no real idea about, but which leaves us unempowered. And we're also not talking about some philosophical idea that the world is a meaningless, directionless place of just random chaos, because we can see in our ordinary experience how what we do has an impact. So these two very disempowering perspectives, and what we in Buddhism sort of associate with these two views, is what we call eternalism and nihilism. These we very often find in our cultural discourse in the form of some of the beliefs from the theistic traditions, the religions, and also in the so-called sciences, which essentially then construct a dogma around materialism that believes that we're nothing more than tangible material. Of course, we can see that everything that really matters for us in life is about what is intangible. Things like love and the ideas of meaning, purpose, compassion, love, strength, and so on. These have so much to do with an intangible dimension of the subjective or consciousness. So when we look at the very immediate experience that we have, we can see that it comes about through causation and not through these two disempowering positions of either something greater that's manipulating the things, or just that things happen for no rhyme or reason. And that's then why we attribute a lot of value to this statement here. And when we chant it, then in Sanskrit, it says, Ye dharma hetu prabhava hetum teshum tatagato hayawadat teshum chayo niroda evambadi mahashamana. Which roughly in English then means all dharmas originate from causes. And what we say with all dharmas here is all ordinary dualistic phenomena. Essentially the truth of suffering. And that does not just come about like that. It comes about due to certain causes. And this is the scope of the Buddha's teaching. As it goes on to say, these causes were explained by the Tathagata. The cessation of these causes was also explained by the great renunciant. And by the way, I should have capitalized the great renunciant, because that is also referring to the Buddha, who then taught how, understanding the causes, which is what his teaching addresses, then the Buddha also proceeds to the remedy, which is bringing about the cessation of these causes. So we have a condition which is curable. And this is then what the Buddha, as the great physician, then taught. And in approaching this as a physician, then we use the approach that you would have as a physician, which is determining there's an illness. We have to acknowledge the illness. We have a cause of the illness. We can see that the illness is curable, and that there's a cure, there's a path. So these are the Four Noble Truths, and this is common to Buddhism in all its various traditions. To free ourselves then, to free ourselves from samsara's hallucination, we begin with recognizing confusion, and we work with the principles of the Four Noble Truths. These are then the truth of suffering, dukkha, the truth of the origin of suffering, the truth of the goal, or the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path. The various hallucinations that monkey has, they're driven by countless styles of thinking. And in addressing this whole issue, we're going to be working with ego and what drives ego, and specifically then we begin to go back through the 5 skandhas, and particularly working with the 5th skandha, which is the conceptual or the conscious dimension of thinking. And that's what Trungpa Rinpoche speaks about in terms of the 6 realms. They're driven by these various kinds of thoughts, which are then discursive thought, grasshopper-like thought, display-like thoughts, film show-like thoughts, etc. Recognizing this place of conceptuality and this dynamic of our conceptuality, that's the starting point of the cure. We're not talking about stopping external circumstances. We definitely can understand the suffering of the world in terms of the madness that's happening in the world around us, of course, but in terms of us and our perceptions and what drives our inability to compassionately act and relate to that space. It's not going to help if we are overwhelmed and we are caught up in a brittle sense of me versus the other. The compassionate action is premised on the wisdom that sees through this painful little shell of me and the other. And that's where it's essential that the practitioner, the bodhisattva, and so on, is able to deal with what it is that constructs the initial solidification of our personal little confused experience. So for us to break free and ultimately to be there to liberate the suffering of the world, there has to be this starting point where we deal with our own confusion and how it originates. So the Four Noble Truths, they are the basis of the Buddha's teaching. These are the first and the foundational teachings. They are associated with what we call the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. We begin with the truth of suffering, but also it's important that when we speak about the Four Noble Truths, that we also understand that we're working with an empowered situation, that we understand the origin as something that can be worked with, that we understand that the situation is curable, that the suffering is something external to us, and also that we can then proceed along a path of actually putting suffering to an end. Trungpa just says, we're always trying to fill the gap, to make things right, to find that extra bit of pleasure or security. The continuing action of struggle and preoccupation is very irritating and painful. Eventually, eventually one begins to become irritated by just being me. And also he says, whether we eat, sleep, work, play, whatever we do, life contains dukkha, dissatisfaction, pain. If we enjoy pleasure, we're afraid to lose it. We strive for more and more pleasure or try to contain it. If we suffer in pain, we want to escape it. We experience dissatisfaction all the time. All activities contain dissatisfaction or pain continuously. So this is where we identify how monkey creates this suffering by never actually being willing to experience and to try to fill up space. And so this is where there is this continual restlessness, where we are not at ease with who we are. And once we have that dis-ease, this irritating condition of being ourselves, then we're continually engaging with the world from that point of view, where even if we have pleasure, we're afraid that we will lose it. We're still dependent on something external. Or if we're suffering, again, we feel that this is encroaching on us and we want to avoid it. So there's continually this painful place that pervades all of our experiences, which is this initial sense of me that's constructed on the basis of this dualistic fixation. Dukkha, the suffering that we have, we avoid it, or we keep it hidden through busyness. And we exist in a way where we're continually searching for the next moment. To recognize suffering is the first noble truth. It's like the first step in the 12 steps. We need to recognize that there is an addiction. Then we need to recognize first the humble place of saying, yes, I haven't succeeded in achieving the glorious confirmation of my worth. I am in fact confused and I am suffering. And that's a biggie. So just the first noble truth is not that obvious. Seeing the source of suffering then is to see ego's struggle, and that is the second noble truth. So when we're living our ordinary life and just basically operating on the premise of suffering, then we kind of manage to not address the issue by just having a lot to do. We're busy. And the truth is, we're always on to the next moment. We're actually never living our life. So to acknowledge and confront this suffering is the first noble truth. And when we have the initial recognition of suffering, then we examine our thoughts for the source of this dissatisfaction. And that's where we see that this dissatisfaction comes through this struggle to maintain ourselves, which in turn traces its origins to the development and operation of ego. Now, of course, we might have to think of suffering in other terms, but this is where you would want to take the words of the Buddha as valid enough that you would want to look into it and reflect on it. Is that true what the Buddha says? Is that where suffering originates? And generally taking the teaching that we encounter in this book and reflecting on it, because it's different from how we ordinarily tend to pin the blame on external source. Here we are beginning to look at where does the confusion and the production of confusion and the ensuing suffering actually originate. So this is the scope of the path of wisdom. And this, of course, also is tied up with beginning to understand the deep level of, you could say, our basic goodness and the softness of our mind, the goodness and the qualities of the mind that always abides there. But it starts with initially beginning to recognize something within ourselves. And that's where the Buddha's teaching is very helpful in terms of actually analyzing where does this start. So Trungpa says, we go around and around trying to improve ourselves through struggle until we realize that the ambition to improve ourselves itself is the problem. Insight comes only when there are gaps in our struggle, only when we stop to rid ourselves of thought, when we cease siding with the pious good thoughts against bad impure thoughts, only when we allow ourselves simply to see the nature of thought. So seeing the struggle of ego is where we begin to understand suffering, and we begin to know that, or rather understand where suffering originates. We might think that we're at war with the ego, but that's not the point. We're never at war. If we never think in terms of the other as being the cause of it. We might sometimes in Buddhism use the image of warfare, like defeating samsara, overcoming ego, all of that. We might use the word, but what we're actually really working with in terms of the practice of meditation, in terms of understanding the nature of it, is this non-dual situation where we are unnecessarily projecting. And that's where it's not going to help to demonize ego and think that we are at war with the sinful or the dark side or anything. This is just operating on the premise of ego itself. So this kind of struggle would just be another expression of really ego's circle of confusion and struggle. Ego is, and that's the important point, it's a delusion. And the resolution lies in the insight that sees through this delusion. Allowing gaps in ego's struggle is what provides this kind of insight. And that kind of gap and that kind of insight, it's something that we achieve through then the practice of the path. Trungpa says, we discover the third noble truth, the truth of the goal. That is non-striving. That is where we see our basic goodness, that we begin to conceive of it and trust it. This means that the truth of cessation, the third noble truth, means that samsara is curable. We don't have an intrinsically evil world. We see that we need to learn to let go. We can see that we need these gaps, these insights, but that requires the discipline of the path. So when we realize that there is a sane, awake quality that's basic to us, we intuit that this is something that abides within ourselves and it's untouched by the struggle, by the confusion. So we begin to have this intuition of a basic purity that we naturally possess. And that's the truth of the goal. This is where we understand that we're not stuck with who we are in our confusion. We're not destined to suffer. So we see then that there's a need then. That's where we need to also rely on the insights of what the Buddha offers, or begin to understand what is being taught in the context of, say, the present work. We see that we need to drop ego's effort to secure and solidify. And in doing so, then we begin to see that there's an awake quality that's naturally present in the absence of our ignorant attempts to secure and solidify. And that's where we need to learn how to let be. But letting be is not that easy. And that's where we do need the discipline of the spiritual path. The fourth noble truth is the path. It's the vehicle for letting go of what drives confusion. So this is like when we go to the doctor and the doctor says, yes, indeed, you're not well. This is what causes it. But your condition is curable. And so if we identify what it is that causes our illness, we stop that and we provide the conditions for eliminating what it is that drives our health, that drives our illness, then health naturally manifests. The doctor doesn't create our health. The doctor just eliminates what it is that obstructs our health. And in the wake of eliminating illness, then health naturally emerges. So the fourth noble truth is then the course of remedy. And the course of remedy is letting go of what drives the confusion. It's addressing the illness. Now, when we talk about this here, particularly we're emphasizing the practical way of doing this, which is working with our consciousness. We've already established what needs to be done. You could say we already have established the view. And that's where we then need to apply then the remedy for our condition, and that's where we then speak about meditation. Now, meditation in various ways is something that's often misunderstood. And even in the Asian or in these traditions of meditation as we find it, let's say in India and Tibet, there are different ways of understanding meditation. And some might think that meditation is this very focused place where we basically secure ourselves in a place that's away from the evil world. And that's where we just want to control the mind and make sure that it's peaceful. But the problem is, and then Trungpa makes a point about this, he says, well, his point is about concentrating the mind. It might enable control, but it also enforces duality, that there's this and that, my mind and the possible disturbances that need to be addressed, or my mind and what I'm dwelling on when I'm focusing. Concentration, this could then, as a result of this kind of just controlling practice, just concentrating, focusing the mind, it could bring about a side effect, which is not really what the objective of meditation is about, but it is something that can happen. And that is, we bring about a very sort of humorless, introvert, rigid condition of mind. And when we live like that, or when we practice like that, then our practice is sort of about a process where we think there's something else that's going to emerge in the future. I'm practicing right now. It's painful, but something will emerge. And that's where our practice becomes about the future, living for what has yet to come. But there's another approach to meditation, which is much more real, much deeper, and much more open. And that's what we could describe in terms of samadhi. That does not involve imposing our control over the mind. It doesn't involve concentration, and it's not about something that might emerge in the future. I remember some years ago somebody was describing about some tradition where the person was very impressed that somebody was having the ability to remain in jhana, or in a sort of absorption for an extended period of time. And that's not what we're really intending on the path of enlightenment. The idea is that you remain in some sort of jhana and then something might emerge. But that's not really what would bring about enlightenment. So we have to be a little bit discerning when it comes to the practice of meditation. Real meditation enables us to step out of ego. The techniques enable connecting us with nowness. Our meditation should give a sense of gap, space, Buddha nature. The precision of sitting, walking, and breathing introduces us to simplicity. With the discovery of simplicity, we become aware of the beauty and significance of everyday life. So, when we engage in meditation, in terms of the Buddhist path of awakening, this is about ultimately vipassana, enabling us to see through the hoax of ego. It's not about doing something that might in the future give some sort of result. It's about connecting with being here right now. It's about the present state of mind. So we might have various kinds of techniques, but they're all about enabling us to relate to the present. When we practice meditation, we become very aware of our natural goodness, our natural quality. And it also enables us to begin to be very present. We begin to become precise. We don't really miss a beat. We're very switched on, so to speak. You could say our abilities become enhanced. And that's because we're working with simplicity, and we're working with something that connects us with the ground of where we are. For example, in the sitting practice, doing walking practice, relating to the breath. And there's a sense of something that has nothing to do with something that might come, but it's relating with what's real. For example, the breath that exits from our nostrils, fuses with space, and so on, entering and exiting. So this kind of simplicity, it enables us to experience a dimension of reality and enables us to become sensitized to the qualities, the texture, and also the wisdom and the significance that exists within our everyday reality. Now, I have to say I didn't stop before because there wasn't really any questions, but I can see there is one question at this point, so I'll just say, is there any point to looking at an original cause? I know that Buddhism looks at the current state as an interdependence of various causes. But is there an original state of emptiness from which we moved, i.e. samsara? Yes, and that was described in the earlier chapter. Try and have a look at the chapter before this, the development of ego, and that's actually where, I forget the page number actually exactly, but it's actually where Trungpa Rinpoche describes how we have this blackout, and on the basis of this blackout, then there emerges a sense of me. And with the me, then there's a sense of the other. And once there is the sense of the other, then there is also the sense of likes and dislikes. But this is then where we have this initial condition of the first skandha, which is the perception of form, and we begin to solidify self and other. And then the skandhas develop, because then we begin to see things in terms of how we are projecting like or nice feeling, bad feeling, and from that we begin to have then the ideas, I want this, I don't want that. Then comes the concepts, good, bad, and so on. So this condition of how this all originates is something that we see in the chapter of the development of ego, the previous chapter. So try and have a look in there. But the bottom line is also that we don't really, you're right, we don't really look at some sort of original cause, because something really, at one level, we could say nothing has happened. It's a bit like the cause of a dream. We can say there is the alaya vijnana that creates all of these, but at the same time also we know that the creation, they in and of themselves haven't really come into existence. The experiences in a dream haven't actually really come into existence. So the condition is very much one of delusion. Of course, that initial blackout and the ensuing skandhas, that is what we're looking at, and that's where we're working our way backward. But we all the time see this as the condition in which we are not actually looking at some solid original cause, but rather just the conditions of a delusion. Okay. So coming back to then the the remedy of our condition, which is meditation, then we understand that the kind of technique that enables us to be thoroughly present is not about just removing ourselves or controlling our mind in any way. It has to do with connecting with our reality, and this is the way that, particularly then in the Vajrayana context, when we speak about Shamatha and Vipassana, and of course what we're presenting here from Trungpa Rinpoche is very much informed by the traditions of Mahamudra and Ati or Dzogchen, then the inspiration is very much one of just discovering this Buddha nature that is already spontaneously present. And once we do that, then we begin to discover a dimension of dignity and beauty. So here in the present slide then, we say any action can have dignity and open us to the joy and beauty of movement. As with Japanese tea ceremony, we can discover precision and space in communication. So Trungpa Rinpoche says, you become aware that each precise movement has dignity. We have long forgotten that activities can be simple and precise. Every act of our lives can contain simplicity and precision, and can thus have tremendous beauty and dignity. So Trungpa Rinpoche gives the example of the tea ceremony, and he also speaks a bit about when we communicate. The pouring of the tea, and of course creating the tea and all of that. It involves a number of movements that all actually give us the possibility of relating fully with what we're doing. So it's not just the tea ceremony as such, but also any action that we're doing. One of my great teachers actually introduced me to the beauty of dishwashing, and he always would say, "I love dishwashing," and very humbly he would just do the dishes and do them very well. And I remember, yes, the whole culture around the kitchen actually being that of just very precise and a lot of joy, simplicity. Making a good meal, cleaning after us, cleaning the kitchen, and then leaving the kitchen. And this, you could say, also reflects this kind of dignified and joyous engagement with the detail of our activities. Similarly with speaking, where the space provided by pause brings some beauty to the communication. We don't have to overload the communication with a lot of words. This can be done without us being self-conscious. It could come from simply allowing the natural flow, that we begin to introduce this dimension of being present without being overwhelmed. So, such practice is the attempt to see the nowness quality in action, which is why it is known as Shamatha, the development of peace. When you see the nowness of the very moment, there is no room for anything but openness and peace. And this is where it applies that when we're practicing shamatha, we're just engaging with the technique. We're not second guessing it, interpreting, or waiting for something. So the practice of shamatha, it brings this awareness and precision that we're talking about. So with the term shamatha, the Tibetan is shine, which means calm the or peace. Trungpa Rinpoche translates it as peacefulness. So this is very much associated with the what we could call, from a Mahayana perspective, we call this the Hinayana, in the sense that this is the organic place where we begin the path and just relate to the very clear, immediate discipline of addressing our own situation. So then going into some of the questions and answers, and here I'm just, because the question is long, I've taken the liberty of paraphrasing. The phrase basically says, how the question goes, how do we train in allowing a gap and letting be? And Trungpa Rinpoche also has a long answer at the end of which he says, we have to give up this desire to be fed, and then the gap automatically comes. We cannot produce the gap through effort. So we should be realistic. We shouldn't have unrealistic expectations. The teacher of the path is not going to be someone who removes our problems. We're going to have to relate to our reality. We're going to have to sort out things by ourselves. We haven't signed up and then as Buddhists, then everything's going to be fine. We're going to be told just what to do and so on. And then we'll discover some amazing gap. It's about us working with our situation, using the teachings intelligently in our own experience. We can't expect that things are going to be just delivered to us. Then there's another question. In preparing for the path, how to not rush in? And again, here I'm paraphrasing both the question and the answer. And I, like with everything in this study, I really just want you to actually read the book. Even if it just involves that you actually think that I might be completely misconstruing what Trungpa just says, then that suspicion, if that could drive you to read the book, then my objective has been completed. Anyway, so the short of the question is, in preparing for the path, how not to rush in? And the answer is sort of paraphrased. We might think the path is beautiful and all our questions will be answered. We need to let go of such expectations. We will need to sort things out for themselves. We will need to sort things out for ourselves. So so this is where we're not going to be looked after, where there's we need to know what the path is about and understand what it involves. It doesn't involve us being saved in any way. And the more we understand that, I think the more trust emerges in the nature of the path. And that again motivates us further for actually engaging. See, we're speaking about a path. We're not speaking about salvation. We're not speaking about miracles. We're speaking about working with ourselves. Excuse me. Okay. So our basic intelligence, we could say it's like a light that we perceive through the gaps. So when we are practicing the path, particularly meditation, there will be some gaps where we let go, and that's where we begin to experience something that's inside ourselves. But in doing so, then we need to be clear that we're not talking about some sort of seed of something that we have that then grows bigger and bigger and bigger. This discussion can sometimes be a little bit tangled up in a semantic dimension about what we're talking about, because of course we could say it looks like we're changing, but it's quite important really in terms of the view and our understanding of the nature of the path, that is not as if we are building something up. It's rather that we're uncovering. And this is a very important point. And this is very much the thrust then of what we call the third turning of the wheel. In fact, also it's implicit in the second turning of the wheel. But in understanding the cessation of the path, or the fact that we can be cured, it's necessary that we understand that just like when we're being treated, we're not building up our health. We're really just removing the illness, like the example I came with before. So in the case of the Buddha was someone who had pursued particular disciplines and spiritual techniques, but he actually attained enlightenment and awakening when he set aside any kind of contrivance and just was determined to work with himself, with what he was, with what is. So the basic intelligence that we possess, this Buddha nature, it's something that is never improved in nirvana, it's never tarnished in samsara. It's something that is always there. And through the practice of meditation, and sometimes the mist gives way to the light that's in there. So when monkey is thinking of samsara and wanting to get out, then the idea of that there could be something else in some way. The fact that we can even conceive that this is suffering means that it's not basic to us. Suffering, if it was basic to us, then we wouldn't have any objection. But the mere fact that monkey can experience or rather conceive that I want to get out, that is an indication of this basic Buddha nature, or this basic drive towards freedom. So, so we need to recognize that right from the outset. So then there's a question that says, how does one deal with practical life situations while trying to be simple and experience space? And again, this is where you do need to read, but just paraphrasing it. So it's about, we need to experience our ground, the solidity as we perceive it, and not imagine or romanticizing open space. So space is experienced in relation to earth. So our path is relating with the kitchen sink level of things. Any spiritual experience should be brought into the old and familiar of everyday life. From here we can begin to discover how solidity and spaciousness coexists. No questions? Okay. So we conclude then for today. For the next time, please read the chapters The Bodhisattva Path and Shunyata. Thank you very much.